In April 1956, an unremarkable oil tanker eased away from a dock in Newark, New Jersey, and pointed south toward Houston. She was a leftover from the Second World War, a rusty thing called the Ideal X, and on her deck sat 58 aluminum boxes, each one the size of a small garage, bolted to the steel frame. A trucker from North Carolina had bet almost his entire fortune that those boxes were about to change the world. Almost everyone watching thought he had lost his mind. Nothing about that morning looked like the birth of anything. There were no crowds, no speeches, just a tanker, some cranes, and a few dozen metal boxes. And yet what happened on that deck is the reason your phone was assembled in China. Your coffee came from Vietnam, and a t-shirt can travel 10,000 miles and still cost less than the bag you carry at home in. The story of the modern world has a lot of heroes and a lot of villains, but its most important character is a steel box, 38 feet long, with no moving parts at all. To understand why that box matters so much, you have to picture the world before it. Before containers, shipping cargo across an ocean was a kind of organized chaos. Goods moved in what was called breakbulk, which is a gentle word for an ugly process. Sacks of coffee, crates of machinery, drums of chemicals, bales of cotton, each one loaded onto a ship by hand, and not by a few men, by armies of them. A single cargo ship might need 100 longshoremen working day and night for a week to fill its hold. They carried loads on their backs. They used hooks and ropes and muscle, and every crate had to be stowed just so, wedged in among 1,000 other crates that had nothing to do with each other. Cargo got stolen, cargo got broken. Ships sat in port for 3 weeks, sometimes a month, just being loaded and unloaded, and all that time they earned nothing. Here is the part that is hard to believe today. The cost of moving goods across the ocean was so high that, for most of human history, distance was a wall. A manufacturer in Ohio could not compete with a manufacturer in Osaka, because the goods spent so long sitting on docks and so much money paying dock workers, that by the time they arrived, the price made no sense. Trade existed, of course, but it moved in things that were light and precious. Spices, silk. Coffee, the everyday stuff of life, stayed close to where it was made. And into this world walked a man named Malcom McLean. He was not a shipping magnate, he was a trucker. He had started with one old truck in the 1930s, hauling empty barrels between farms in North Carolina, and over 20 years he had built one of the biggest trucking companies in America. McLean knew trucks, and McLean knew something that haunted every trucker who has ever lived, which is the agony of waiting in line. The story goes that back in 1937, McLean had pulled his truck up to a dock with a load of cotton, and then he sat there, hour after hour, watching dock workers slowly empty his trailer by hand and reload every last bale onto a ship. And he had a thought that would not leave him alone. What if you never unloaded the trailer at all? What if the box itself, the thing the cargo already sat in, could just be lifted whole off the back of his truck and dropped straight onto the ship? It was a simple idea. It was also, for the next 20 years, an idea nobody knew how to build. The cranes were wrong, the ships were wrong, the ports were wrong. The whole industry was built around the backbreaking labor that McLean wanted to eliminate, and nobody with a ship wanted to throw that system away on a hunch. So McLean waited, and he got richer. And then, in 1955, he did something that proved he was not really a careful businessman at all. He sold his entire trucking company, borrowed $42 million on top of it, and bought a shipping line. What he bought were 2 old war, surplus oil tankers, and he set about cutting them up. He built new steel frames on their decks to hold boxes. He designed the boxes themselves, standard aluminum containers that could lock into place and survive salt water and storms. And on the 26th of April 1956, on a converted tanker called the Ideal X, he loaded his first 58 containers and sailed them from Newark to Houston. Now here is where the numbers get almost absurd. In the old breakbulk system, it cost about $5.83 to load a single ton of cargo onto a ship. All of it labor. McLean's containers loaded that same ton for about 16 cents. That is not a rounding improvement. That is a cost that fell by more than 97% overnight. When the cranes lifted those first boxes onto the Ideal X, a wall that had stood since the Phoenicians was suddenly gone. and nothing about the old world could survive it. The first thing to die was the dock itself. Within a generation, the great finger piers of New York and London, those long wooden quays where tens of thousands of longshoremen had earned their living, became obsolete overnight. The new container ships were too big, too mechanical, too fast to turn around to bother with old ports built for muscle. The work moved to new purpose-built terminals, vast concrete aprons, stacked with boxes, and run by a handful of men driving cranes the size of buildings. Whole neighborhoods emptied out. The old dockside economies, the bars and the boarding houses and the casual labor that had sustained a million families, simply dried up. The longshoreman, the romantic, weather-beaten figure who had carried the world's trade on his back for centuries, became a ghost. The ships still came. They just did not need him anymore. But the box did not just destroy. It also built on a scale nobody had imagined. Because once loading a ship cost cents instead of dollars, distance stopped being a wall. A factory in Taiwan could make electronics, stuff them into a container, and send them to a warehouse in Rotterdam for less than it once cost to truck them across a single state. And that changed everything about how the world made things. The proving ground was a war. In the 1960s, the United States poured soldiers and material into Vietnam, and almost immediately the supply lines collapsed. The military was trying to feed and arm 500,000 men on the far side of the Pacific, using the same breakbulk chaos that had choked the old docks. Goods sat on piers in sheets of monsoon rain. Whole shiploads went missing. So the Pentagon called in McLean's company, now called Sealand, and asked whether those funny boxes might actually work. They worked. Containers turned a port that had been drowning in disorder into something that ran like a factory line. By the time the war wound down, the military was a true believer, and so was every shipping line that had been watching. In 1966, Sealand ran the first containers across the Atlantic into a re-engineered port in the Netherlands, and the European half of the system fell into place. The box had gone global. What followed was less an industry growing than a logic taking over. Every port that wanted to survive had to rebuild itself around the container. Every shipper had to buy the same standard boxes, so that a container locked in Shanghai could be lifted unchanged onto a train in Los Angeles or a truck in Hamburg. One box, one size. From factory floor to your front door, handled by machines the whole way. And the ships grew because the economics demanded it. If a container is the unit, then a bigger ship that carries more containers simply spreads its costs across more cargo. So the vessels swelled from those first 58 boxes to vessels carrying 10,000, then 18,000, then more. The megaports rose to meet them. Shanghai, Singapore, Shenzhen, Rotterdam, vast landscapes of cranes and concrete where the world's goods gather before fanning out to every continent. Today, more than 90% of everything you own, the chair you sit in, the screen you watch, the medicine in your cabinet, crossed an ocean inside one of these boxes. That is the hidden engine of the world you live in. It is the reason a company can design a phone in California, build the screen in Korea, assemble the chips in Taiwan, put it together in China, and sell it in Berlin 2 weeks later, with every part arriving exactly when it is needed. The shipping industry has a name for this. They call it just in time. And it is the most efficient machine human beings have ever built for moving stuff around. And that is precisely what makes it so dangerous. Because here is the thing about efficiency. Efficiency means cutting away everything that is not strictly necessary. It means running lean. It means, above all, getting rid of slack. And slack, the extra time, the spare capacity, the redundant route, is exactly what a system reaches for when something goes wrong. In March 2021, something went wrong. A megaship called the Ever Given, longer than 4 football fields, was pushing north through the Suez Canal, that narrow strip of water that lets ships cut between Asia and Europe without sailing all the way around Africa. A gust of wind caught her. She turned, dug her bow into the sandy bank, and stopped. For 6 days, she sat there, wedged diagonally across one of the busiest waterways on Earth. Now consider what flows through that canal. About 1/10 of all the trade on the planet and nearly 1/3 of all the world's container traffic passes through Suez every year, more than $1 trillion worth of goods. With the Ever Given blocking it, an estimated $9.5 billion of cargo piled up behind her every single day. Ships anchored and waited, or turned and began the long detour around the southern tip of Africa, burning fuel and burning time. Factories on 3 continents quietly started to run out of parts. 6 days, 1 ship, 1 canal, and the just-in-time machine that runs the planet started to wobble. Insurance rates spiked, shipping costs quadrupled. Managers who had spent their careers stripping out every spare hour of inventory suddenly discovered why their grandparents had kept warehouses full. The whole glittering system, the one that lets you order a gadget on Tuesday and hold it on Friday, turned out to rest on a few thin arteries that a single stuck vessel could choke. When they finally freed the Ever Given, the canal opened again, and after a few weeks the ripples faded. The system held. It always had, and there is a temptation to look at that and conclude the system is fine. It is not fine, it is magnificent, and it is fragile, and those two things are not in tension. They are the same thing. The box that shrank the world made trade so cheap that we built an entire civilization on the assumption that it would never stop moving. And the cheaper it got, the more we leaned on it, the more we stripped out the slack, the more every single link in the chain became load, bearing. Malcom McLean could not have known, on that gray morning in Newark in 1956, what he was really building. He thought he was cutting the cost of moving cotton. What he actually did was wire the planet into a single machine, humming with containers, running so close to the edge of its own efficiency that a gust of wind in the desert could make it stutter. He gave the world a box, and inside that box, he quietly put the whole modern economy, with all its speed and all of its danger.